I'm not sure which phrase I heard more over the past weekend. Is Red Bull dominance finally over? Or hawk tour?
You gotta give him that hawk tour and spit on that thing, you get me?
Welcome to Race Weekend Update. The Orange Army is gonna love this one, because I'm about to spit on that thing. Before the Spanish Grand Prix, Max Verstappen said, "Our era of dominance is over." And then he proceeded to bring home yet another victory. There's never been much question that Max would be the favorite to win here, but it seems like the moment someone other than Max does well in qualifying, we have to spend the whole weekend listening to all the pundits speculate on Red Bull dominance being over. It's getting old. I understand why they do it. Not only would it be good for the sport, and they want it to be true, but also they want to be able to say they called it first. Well, I'm going to call this first. As far as results are concerned, Max is going to continue to dominate this season right until the end. But that doesn't mean I think this is going to be a boring season. Far from it. I'm not a Max Verstappen fan, but I do respect the man. And part of that respect is knowing that if he has a car that can win, he will win. The Spanish Grand Prix was a fantastic example of how I expect the rest of this season to go. Lando Norris is a great driver, and he did a great job putting the car on pole and turning that into a podium. But he had a car that could have won the race, and he didn't. Red Bull went out there with a car that wasn't necessarily the fastest, and they won anyway. Why is that? Well, for starters, Red Bull rarely fumbles strategy, and Max rarely makes mistakes. He had a bit of a moment going into turn 7 early on, but he managed to hold it and it didn't affect his race. And that was the full extent of Max's errors. He also has top-tier race strategist Hannah Schmitz in his corner, making sure the strategy they executed gave him the best opportunity to win. So by the end, Lando may have been closing, but he was never within striking distance. Just one mistake from the driver, pit crew, or the strategists would have cost Red Bull the race. But yet again, everyone did their job competently. This may seem like a pretty simple ask, but it is actually insane to see a team so consistently operating with so few operational weaknesses. Ferrari could have never executed a strategy with such expert timing. Mercedes didn't have the pace in their car, and even if they did, George would have somehow ended up ahead of Lewis and then made one large race-losing blunder. As for McLaren, one could argue that Lando only lost because he got held up behind Russell in the first stint, which cost him about 4 seconds. But Max found himself in a similar position and managed to get past quick enough to put victory on the table. This is the difference between a great driver like Lando Norris and the best driver. When push comes to shove, Max makes it happen, and Red Bull makes sure the team isn't putting any obstacles in his way. After 2023, we all knew Max could win in the fastest car. But right now, while the car isn't dominant, Max and the team are picking up the slack. This must be making the other teams feel very inadequate. Like when your single friend who's always ripped gets injured and it turns out he's still way more attractive than you, even with a dad bod. When you're up against the whole package, even if they start to slip up in one area, everything else makes up for it. So you have to up your game across the board. For Max fans, this must feel incredible. Right now, nobody can argue that Newey's rocket ship is doing all the work. By having Perez in the other car, finishing in the midfield every race, they've shown that the car itself isn't enough to finish near the front. And even though Red Bull hasn't been the fastest car at every track recently, Max is still up 69 points over second place. He could skip 2 races at this point and still be comfortably in the lead. Yet he is still out there every race, fighting for those fine margins that make the difference between a podium and victory. Yes, 2024 is truly going to be Max's hot girl summer. He's going to carry the team to yet another victory, and he's going to do it early. But I'm not saying this is going to be boring. Quite the contrary. In 2023, when Max was just driving off into the distance, winning every race by over 30 seconds without even having to try, that was boring. In large part, that was thanks to the car being so much better than the rest, so there wasn't much competition. But this season, I think, will be Max's best, even though he's not going to set any records. If it pans out the way I think it will, 2024 will be the season where Max proves why he's the greatest, or GOATed, as the younger fans would say. It feels like a TV show where the protagonist constantly has his back up against the wall, yet always finds a way to win in the end. I'm here for it. I'll make the comparison to Sebastian Vettel. What was his greatest season? Was it 2013 when he and the RB9 joined forces to dominate a season so hard that the records would stand for a decade? Or was it the season where he won by just a few points, having never led the Drivers' Championship up until he won it? I would argue that the victory is sweeter when the win wasn't certain. There is little sport in a foregone conclusion, and right now, each race is anything but a foregone conclusion. I can already hear you saying, "But wait a minute, didn't you just say that Max is going to be winning? And if you can predict that he's going to win, isn't that going to be boring? But then you said it wouldn't be boring." Well, yes. Not only is he going to win, but the results are going to make it look like it was yet another dominant season. The difference is that he'll be winning each race with pure skill. For the rest of this season, I expect Verstappen to rock up to each race with a minor disadvantage, or at best, a car that is on par with the fastest on the track. And I expect him to win. But in order for him to win, he's going to have to give it everything. He's going to drive his balls off every race. I expect him to have to try his hardest at all times, to do whatever it takes to win, and to squeak out those victories by just a few seconds at the most. This is going to be the season where Max picks up a lot of new fans. People hate watching someone dunk on the competition for years on end. But when you've got one of the greatest sportsmen of all time showing up and winning by the skin of his teeth consistently, that's what wins hearts. Something Max has struggled with historically. There were multiple races this season where Max should have been the driver of the day, but the people just don't want to vote for him. And I think that's because when Max was going out there in a car that was by far the best on the grid, all he had to do was beat Checo. He didn't really have to put in much effort. And people aren't impressed when you win when you have an advantage. But right now, while he's being put to the test without an advantage, he's showing he's the real deal. He's not holding back. He is finally being challenged and he's rising to the occasion, consistently coming out on top by the slimmest of margins. I said it last week and I'll say it again. Now this is racing. But even better, I can see the fire burning within him again. When Max was clapping the whole grid, he would win and just say, "Haha, very lovely, nice day at the office." But now that he's working hard for it, you can actually hear that he feels like he's winning again. I said in a previous video that he couldn't win anymore. And what I meant by that is that he couldn't experience that feeling of winning anymore because his wins were hollow. They were expected. Winning didn't feel like an achievement. It felt like meeting expectations. But now when Max wins, there's excitement. He finally feels like he's accomplished something when he goes out there. Something more than merely doing what is expected of him. He's competing at the highest level, sometimes at a disadvantage, and winning. As far as athletes are concerned, the best feeling in the world is demonstrating that you are the best at what you do. And right now, Max Verstappen is proving unequivocally that he is the best at what he does. I grew up with the Michael dominating Formula One, then it was Red Bull and Vettel, and then Lewis and Mercedes. For all of them, there would be seasons where the car did the heavy lifting and they went basically unchallenged. And then there were years where a challenger would get close, but, insert champion here, would win the ship by the slimmest of margins. And it should be obvious which seasons were more enjoyable to watch. The historians and statisticians love to fawn over the seasons like 2023 and 2013 where all the records were broken, calling them some of the greatest of all time because the numbers were so dramatic. But the racing wasn't. The achievements look good in a nice infographic and stand out when featured prominently in your coffee table book, but those seasons suck ass to watch. Only the die-hard fans of the guy who's winning enjoy that. And what they're enjoying is not good racing. They're enjoying being able to talk shit and put down the haters. Luckily for us, that's not what this season is shaping up to be. The seasons like we're having now, where there's a clear favorite to win, but he only just barely wins every time, these are the good times in a period of dominance. The silver linings, the good racing that nobody will remember because the name at the top of the sheet at the end of the race was still Max Verstappen. If you're still watching F1 this season, then there's a pretty good chance that you're not a fair weather F1 fan. The sport shed a lot of those over the past 24 months. It's only us connoisseurs who are able to see that what the racing is right now is a very rare vintage. It's a Verstappen victory steeped in competition, aged in the tightest pack ever, with the occasional hint of Alonso in the tannins. And you know how I know this is good racing? Because I trust your judgment, the viewer. And when I asked you in the poll of the week to give the race in Spain a letter grade, Half of you gave it an A or a B, with the vast majority of people giving it a C. And almost nobody gave it a D or an F. And I have heard that nobody is smarter than the audience. And I do agree, because you're here, so I know you're expecting that thing that I usually tuck away at the end of the video. And here to give it to you is the Canadian Positivity Guy with the spicy joke of the week. George Russell was hot out the gate with a strong performance at the start, but he lost his momentum when he stopped too early and couldn't recover from there. So he ended up crying from disappointment, which ironically is also how your mom would describe the last time we hooked up.